Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Kynan Thistlethwaite with your weekly Vega for Congress Edgar Poe reading, not Edgar Allan Poe. If you're wondering where Jose is, he's a little bit under the weather today. He should be back next week. But I wanted to start us all off by situating where we are in the world, of course. It's been an incredibly turbulent and dangerous situation in the past week since Israel began its illegal, unprovoked assault against Iran. In the United States, the Trump presidency now has been completely caught in this trap, which I may add was deliberately set up for him to fall into. As we had discussed on the International Peace Coalition meeting, which, if you don't know, it's every Friday at 11 a.m., and you should definitely be on, the policy to laying waste to not just Iran, but the entire Middle East was laid out in a policy document called Clean Break, written in 1996. And that was led by, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, and others. And it was written specifically for Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then newly elected as the prime minister of Israel. People will also remember General Wesley Clark's famous interview with Amy Goodman in 2007, where he recalled receiving a classified memo describing how we were going to, quote, take out 7 countries in 5 years. And this was in 2001 that he had gotten this memo. But those 7 countries were Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and then finally finishing off with Iran. So this isn't anything new that we're dealing with. This wasn't planned in the beginning of this year. The prevailing narrative today, though, that Iran is within a week or so of developing a nuclear weapon also isn't new. In fact, we'll hear from Netanyahu himself right now about this.
National Atomic Energy Agency currently says there's no concrete evidence they are. US intelligence says Iran would be years away from having nuclear weapons if they wanted them. That's what Tulsi Gabbard said in March. And the only person consistently saying they're about to get nukes is Bibi Netanyahu. And as this clip from The Daily Show expertly demonstrates, he's been saying that for 30 years.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
So
Yeah, and you should laugh at that. So he's been saying this for about 30 years now. Iran's just that close to getting their nuclear bomb. So what's really the problem here? Let me just add to this. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, had said in an interview on CNN just a couple of days ago that there was no evidence to suggest Iran was building a nuclear weapon. We also heard that, if you may remember, we heard that very same assessment from Tulsi Gabbard on March 25th, which Trump has now come out and said that he's completely disregarding it. But I would say that the problem isn't just about the Trump administration, though, and what their response has been is going to be to this conflict, because what we're actually seeing take place is not just a regime change coup against Iran, but against the United States itself. That is the intention. This is the British trap, to kind of put Trump in a mousetrap where he really doesn't have any choice, and is provoked to go into this conflict and completely sabotage his own presidency. Our response to that should be based on whether or not we, as independent thinking citizens, can intervene directly to bring reason against this unfolding escalation on the part of a patriotic defense of our own nation. And that involves demonstrating to people, including our elected officials, as Jose has done constantly and what you all know him for, but demonstrating to people the stupidity of their own motives and their own axioms. As an example of that, we'll now just play a clip of a commentary of Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. And in that interview, in this clip that we'll see, the question of whether or not Christians are mandated to come to the defense of Israel or not, that had been brought up. And Carlson dealt with it in a particular way. But I also want you to see how the commentator Candace Owen deals with this problem, which I think is quite important.
My support for Israel come from, number one, because biblically we're commanded to support Israel. But number two,
well, hold on.
I'm not holding on.
Hold on. You're a senator, and now you're throwing out theology, and I am a Christian, and I am allowed to weigh in on this. We are commanded as Christians to support the government of Israel?
We are commanded to support Israel. And what
does that mean, Israel?
We're told those who bless Israel will be blessed.
But what? Hold on. Define Israel. This is important. Are you kidding? This is a majority Christian country.
Define Israel? Do you not know what Israel is? That would be the country you've asked like 49 questions about.
So that's what Genesis, that's what God is talking about.
The nation of Israel, yes.
And so is that the current borders, the current leadership? He's talking about the political entity called Israel?
He's talking about the nation of Israel. Yeah, nations exist, and he's discussing a nation. A nation was the people of Israel.
Is the nation
They're the
God's
descendants of
referring
Abraham.
to in Genesis, is that the same as the country run by Benjamin Netanyahu right now?
Yes.
It is.
And I'm really happy he said that, because when you hear it, you realize how ridiculous it sounds. Even if you're not following the theology, if you don't identify as a Christian, you realize that you have a senator that is sitting across saying that his number one reason, he didn't say one of the reasons, he said my number one reason that I support Israel is because the Bible commands me to do so. And just so you know, the Bible does not command, and this is what Tucker Carlson is getting to in that clip, it absolutely does not command you to support the modern state of Israel. Like Genesis is pointing to the modern 1948 created state of Israel, and you must support it despite the fact that it is very much involved in what can only be described as demonic behavior since its creation, right? And so you're going to ignore every other biblical passage. You're going to misinterpret this one. It's a dispensationalist heresy. Dispensationalist heresy, which was factually funded by the World Zionist Congress. And we can do another episode on that as I present to you guys all of the evidence that what it guided the notations. This really stems from the Scofield Bible, the heresy of the Scofield Bible. Scofield himself was an absolute fraud who got funded and was overseas and alleges that he wrote all of these notes in the Bible and is telling people how to read their Bibles. The first time that notations were put underneath the passages. So this is what Genesis says, and this is what it means. And this is how this heresy arrived in America. Then somehow this guy is able to, it becomes the most printed book, and Oxford Press gets behind it because like a random pastor, you get the idea here. It was very much a funded effort to have Christians misunderstand the Bible. And Ted Cruz is one of these Christians.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I was just saying that I think, just to add to Owen's commentary, the people that cause nuclear war are definitely not going to be raptured, as they may believe. Owens herself, as people will know, is a devout, says she's a devout Christian, and she's a very well-known commentator on the right, was a big supporter of Trump, but just after October 7th, the October 7th attack by Hamas, she actually began to ask questions as this genocide then started playing out in Gaza. She had spoken with Professor Norm Finkelstein, and she admitted, I really don't know about the history of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And the way Finkelstein had described it to her was from the standpoint of being a mother. He said, Owens, you're a mother, right? And you are forced to see your children get brutally killed for a crime that wasn't committed by them, but by someone else. And to the Israelis, that's just collateral damage. So just another thing people might want to ask about is, there's a vast amount of secret, illegal nuclear weapons that Israel is in possession of. This has been known to some people for a while, and this happened to be one of the topics of discussion at the International Peace Coalition meeting between Ray McGovern, who's a friend of Jose, a former CIA analyst, co-founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and he was talking with another person, John Steinbach, who's heads the Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee, and they're the treasonous role of CIA counterintelligence officer James Jesus Angleton in securing that arsenal for Israel illegally. That happened to be discussed. And if you don't know who Angleton is, here's just a little snippet from an author, James Douglas, who wrote a very extensive book. I might even say the most authoritative book on the topic of John F. Kennedy's assassination. And there he had said, quote, "The head of the CIA's counterintelligence branch from 1954 to 1974 was James Jesus Angleton, known as the, quote, poet spy. As an undergraduate at Yale in the early 40s, Angleton had founded a literary journal, Furioso, which published the poetry of Ezra Pound, E.E. Cummings, and Archibald MacLeish. After he went on to Harvard Law School, Angleton was drafted into the U.S. Army. He became a member of the counterintelligence branch of the Office of Strategic Services, which was the World War II predecessor to the CIA. The OSS and CIA suited Angleton perfectly. Counterintelligence became less a wartime mission than a lifelong obsession. For Angleton, the Cold War was an anti-communist crusade with his CIA double agents engaged in a battle of light against darkness. So that's Angleton. I might add that Ray had also mentioned in the IPC meeting that Angleton had played a role, a nefarious role in the cover-up of Kennedy's assassination. Actually, Angleton had begun surveilling Lee Harvey Oswald, the quote-unquote lone assassin, in November of 1959, 4 years before the assassination. And he had also written a 180-page file on Oswald just 1 week before the assassination took place. But going back to this issue of Israel's nuclear weapons, you notice that no one is actually bothering to ask the question, why aren't we calling for Israel to get rid of their nuclear weapons? Why hasn't there been a call by nations in the Middle East to make that region a nuclear-free zone? And those are just some things to ask people, whether it's someone you meet on the street or an elected official. And of course, when you're out organizing and working with the campaign, you should also be talking about the solutions. At the St. Petersburg International Forum in Russia, where you had over 150 nations that were present, Putin had actually proposed that the enriched uranium from Iran could be sent to Russia, where it would then be processed and used for civilian purposes, for nuclear power. And another thing you could do is you could establish a regional consortium with representatives of all nations on it, and the guarantors should be the United States, Russia, and China. you could then build nuclear reactors throughout the area for desalination purposes, as Lyndon LaRouche described in his Oasis plan. And that could also be done with Israeli engineers, which, as I've told you, they already built the nuclear weapons. So that could be done, and that could also be proposed along with a new security and development architecture for the world, which would put an end to the wars that have destroyed the Middle East. So with that, what we'll now do, this is 14 days before the 4th of July, and we're going to, before we go to our usual Poe reading, we're going to read a paper by Lyndon LaRouche called Continuing the American Revolution. And I'll just say, to set this up, that although there was a report celebrating the 250th anniversary of the American military, which is held in Washington on June 14th, and that was attended by thousands, Americans, for the most part, are still unaware that at the end of it, that the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord on April 19, Fort Ticonderoga on May 10th, and Bunker Hill on June 17th had come and gone. Those battles against the British happened in 1775, 250 years ago. Could it be that celebrations of these victories against the British were being silently suppressed because the British are working on retaking the White House, even as we speak, by encouraging the presidency to play their game in what the British named the so-called Middle East? How is it possible that in the midst of the gear up for America to enter yet another endless no-win war, endless platitudes about thank you for your service, and even a national parade, that the 250th anniversary of the real American Revolution is going essentially uncelebrated outside of those towns and locations where those battles occurred? We do not have to deprogram the American people, even though it may seem at present that they are brainwashed to believe that their actual history never occurred, or that a mythical history that never occurred actually happened. What we have to do is what was recommended by the philosopher Plato. We must cause them to remember, that is, to reassemble their lost history. In that light, let us now go to this short paper that Lyndon LaRouche wrote on the American Revolution. So I'm just gonna pull it up here real quickly. Hopefully people can see this. Okay. So we're just going to read from the roots of the revolution on the second page up until the end of that section. I think I'll start, actually, and then Robert, you can continue. So, the roots of the revolution. The past 1100 years of what is now a globally extended European civilization were dominated by a struggle of those reformers who sought to define what became the modern sovereign nation state. This was a struggle against the imperial globalizers of that time. Then, as now, the would-be globalizers sought to subject many nations and peoples to an arbitrary imperial authority, which was chiefly modeled, then as now, upon the traditions of ancient imperial Rome. About 600 years ago came the first significant, if qualified, success for those reformers in the 15th century Renaissance's attempt to establish the form of sovereign nation state based upon that principle of natural law known variously by the names the general welfare or common good. The principle of natural law signifies that no government has the moral authority to reign except as it is efficiently committed to promote the general welfare of all of its population and that population's posterity. No government has the moral authority to lead other nations, unless it is as zealously devoted to the general welfare of the community of nations as to its own. This quality of government, the general welfare principle, which was adopted as the fundamental constitutional law of the USA in the preamble of the Federal Constitution, defines the only moral form of government. This is a form of government which has repudiated such abominations as the Roman Empire, whereas contemporary U.S. utopians, such as Zbigniew Brzezinski and Samuel P. Huntington, based their perverted model of soldier and state on their intention to establish a form of government by beasts reigning over hunted or herded human cattle. Typical of the qualified success of the Renaissance was the leading role of Nicholas of Cusa in defining the need to establish a community of principle among sovereign nation states, Concordantia Catholica, and Cusa's leading role, example given the Didacta Indurantia, in defining the principles of modern experimental physical science. The role of Cusa in launching that policy of transoceanic exploration, which resulted directly in Columbus using the knowledge supplied by Toscanelli to reach the Americas, and the great impetus to modern science given by Luca Pacioli and Leonardo da Vinci are typical. Also typical is the combined impact of the leadership shown by France's Jeanne d'Arc and Jacques Coeur in making possible the creation of modern France under Louis XI and by the England of Henry VII and Thomas More. However, the enemies of the 15th century Renaissance, led by the hegemonic imperial maritime power of that time, Venice, struck back, plunging Europe into a series of devastating religious wars during that 1511 to 1648 interval, which some historians have rightly defined as a little new dark age. It is that interval of evil, of Venice's policy, and that of its Habsburg accomplices, which is parodied by the present homicidal madness of the clash of civilizations policy of Professor Elliot Golems, Samuel P. Huntington, and Zbigniew Brzezinski. You want to go? Sure.
The Europe which returned to sanity under the peace established through the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, turned to the European colonies in the Americas, especially the North American English colonies, as the only likely place in which to reestablish a new precedent for that principle of sovereign nation-state republicanism associated with Renaissance figures such as Louis Anse and Henry VII. The leadership of the Massachusetts Bay Colony under the Winthrops and Mathers of the 17th and early 18th century provided the seed crystal around which the future United States was built. Europeans, linked directly or indirectly to the leading influence of Gottfried Leibniz, played leading roles from early in the 18th century in building up the foundations of what became the future United States in colonies such as Pennsylvania and Virginia. It is of crucial importance today that our U.S. citizens and their children understand the role which the greatest patriots of England, Ireland, Scotland, France, Germany, and elsewhere in Europe, such as Leibniz and the networks which he created, played in acting to bring our North American Republic into existence. Their conscious intent, as typified by the case of Marquis de Lafayette, was to bring forth in our new republic what Lafayette described as a temple of liberty and beacon of hope for all mankind. Our victory in 1782 to 83 and our escape from chaos with the Philadelphia Draft Constitution of 1787 struck terror and rage in those enemies of humanity ensconced in the British monarchy's East India Company and the Habsburg-centered imperial interest of the Central European princely powers. Thus, the Jacobin terror was launched by London-directed agents of the British Foreign Office's Jeremy Bentham to prevent the implementation of the Constitution adopted under the leadership of Bailey and Lafayette. 5 years of Jacobin terror, the reign of Barras, and the first fascist tyranny, that of self-proclaimed Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, eliminated the earlier role of that France, which had been the crucial strategic supporter of the cause of our independence. France was thus transformed into our enemy for that time. Metternich's Congress of Vienna established the domination of all Europe by two rivals, the British monarchy and the Metternich-led Holy Alliance, who were united in one cause, their hatred of and determination to destroy both the image and actuality of the United States. Under the strategic conditions associated with these developments of 1789 to 1815, the United States of the time of Presidents John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison became relatively culturally pessimistic and significantly corrupted. During the gloomy decades up to 1863, patriots such as the American Whigs who were rallied around Clay, the Careys, Monroe, and John Quincy Adams saved the USA from dismemberment. But the expansion of slavery and the spread of the related forms of corruption typified by Martin Van Buren's and August Belmont's Democratic Party of Jackson, Polk, Pierce, Buchanan, and McClellan were the principal political correlatives of the continued, combined, moral and strategic weakness of the nation. This weakness prevailed up to the time of what has been justly called the Second American Revolution, President Lincoln's great victory over the British monarchy's puppet, the Confederacy. Despite the assassination of Lincoln, the victory over the Confederacy and the development of the USA as the world's leading nation in agricultural and industrial development over the period of 1861 to 1876 caused the spread of the intellectual influence of the American system of political economy through much of the world. This was to be seen in such exemplary cases as Germany in 1877, Tsar Alexander II and Mendeleev's Russia during the same period, in the Meiji Restoration, Japan, and throughout the Americas, and into the emergence of Sun Yat-sen's leadership of China. Thus, as the 1890s approached, France, Germany, Russia, and many other nations were coming into cooperation around transcontinental railway developments and related cooperation. This was inspired by the image of the achievements of the Franklin, Hamilton, Lincoln, Carey American system of political economy as the obvious alternative to the rival parasitical British system. During the 1890s, the United States' enemies, centered around the Prince of Wales, the later Edward VII, launched a global operation which was called, quote, geopolitics. This was a British scheme which was intended to end the cooperation among those nations by putting France, Germany, Russia, Japan, and others at one another's throats. Such were the wars and similar disruptions which erupted over the interval of 1894 to 1917. The hoax of the Dreyfus indictment in France, the launching of Japan's wars against China, Korea, and Russia during 1894 to 1905, and Fashoda in 1898, were parts of this process leading into what became known as World War I. The most significant blow against civilization in general was the successful assassination of U.S. President McKinley in 1901, which put into the U.S. presidential mansion a Theodore Roosevelt, who was, like Woodrow Wilson later, not only a whelp of the Confederacy, but, like his notorious mentor and uncle, a fanatical devotee of that specifically pro-Confederacy form of adoration of the British monarchy. Thus, during the sweep of the 20th century, accepting the 1933 to 1945 role of FDR, the United States has been dominated since the 1901 assassination of McKinley by the influence of a commitment to shared Anglo-American imperial domination of the world at large. This has been accompanied under Presidents Theodore Roosevelt, Wilson, Coolidge, Truman, Nixon, Carter, and also the influence of Eisenhower's unfortunate Arthur Burns, by efforts to uproot even the vestiges of the American system of political economy and to introduce radically irrational extremes of liberal ideology into our schools, universities, and mass media. Ideologies which are inimical not only to the sturdy republicanism of our traditional patriot, but to the very idea of truthfulness itself. That is not to suggest that the role of the United States became all bad under these variously failed or soiled presidencies. The post-war economic reconstruction of the United States of America and Western Europe, for example, under the 1945 to 1963 Bretton Woods system, was a marked success relative to the later decadence of approximately 35 years of the long wave of economic self-destruction launched by Nixon and greatly accelerated by Carter. Thus, as the US economy now crumbles, the best features of the past history of our republic and the related best features of our past relations with Europe, the Far East, and within the Americas beckon to us, telling us to return to the American intellectual tradition which inspired Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt during those memorable past moments when that tradition was all that saved our republic from a threatened descent into oblivion. It is time to renew and continue the American Revolution. So, obviously that's a quite extensive sweeping review of the sort of universal process, historical process that, in LaRouche's account is the actual substance of the emergence of our constitutional republic out of what he said, the past 1100 years of European civilization. So instead of trying to take all that up, I think that it's just a good reminder that, when we talk about having forgotten our history, I think what LaRouche really emphasizes in communicating so much history in such a dense essay is that it really is, it requires a lot of mental labor, and it's not forgotten simply, it's forgotten because there are people who intend to suppress and rewrite history, but it is an actual labor to grasp all of these things. So I think the one thing that occurred to me as I was reading this was just there's the complexity of what LaRouche goes through in what we just read, and then if you look at the exchange between Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson that has been going through the media recently, that I imagine most people have seen, you have a very simple idea that Tucker Carlson is trying to communicate, which is that he believes he's speaking on behalf of a lot of Trump's quote unquote base, that the problem is not some evil, Muslim person on the other side of the world. The problem is the absolute devastation of our own country, the economic devastation, the moral devastation, which is obvious even to people like Tucker Carlson, who his shoes look pretty clean. So if people like that are noticing it, then that there's a real problem. And so the simplicity of Ted Cruz's response is to slander Tucker Carlson as an anti-Semite. And when it's an interesting question when Tucker Carlson asks Ted Cruz, well, what do you mean by Israel? that's not something that Ted Cruz can really answer meaningfully. And then when Tucker Carlson actually gets him to say what he means, it's obviously absurd, because he's saying the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Ted Cruz is saying that the book of Genesis, has an injunction that you have to support the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. And obviously he probably doesn't know very much at all about the history of the Jewish people. And in all truth, he probably doesn't have very much love for the Jewish people either, given the fact that he wants to see them enter into a suicidal war. Yeah.
Just about the paper itself, something that people should know about is that this was written as the memo to be read before LaRouche's January 24, 2002 webcast to present what had actually happened during 9/11. And the reason you should know that is, like I said in the beginning, the Iran war was planned in 2001 when 9/11 was carried out. And, we have the famous memo from Wesley Clark about the 7 wars in 5 years. So just so people know that about the paper.
Right. So this isn't somehow a secondary topic. This was what LaRouche intended to communicate when he was talking about the actual policy that he was seeing coming out of this 7 wars in 5 years, culminating with a war with Iran.
Yeah, and that's going on now.
Right. Yeah. Right in front of our eyes, the same lies that sold the American people into the Iraq war are being trotted out in a really egregious fashion to sort of complete this clean break policy. So with that, I think we should move on to our post story for this evening, which is a story called A Tale of Jerusalem. Can I pull this up? Oh, I just do this and then where's the share? Oh, okay.
Give us a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So here's our story. We're going to need our readers in place. And I'm just going to give a little bit of historical background from some notes that were generously written up for us here. So this story, it comes from the Talmud, or Poe is this is a rewriting of a story that comes from the Talmud. And it's an incident that's, I guess, recounted by an aged nurse who is recalling the siege of Jerusalem in 65 BC by Pompey. And they say, when the holy city was besieged, not many years agone, they let down in a basket every day over the walls so much money as would buy lambs for the daily sacrifices, which lambs they drew up again in the same basket. But an Israelite who spoke Greek, having acquainted the besiegers that so long as sacrifices were offered, the city would not be taken, the profane villains popped a hog in the basket instead of the usual victim. And from that time, we have been accustomed to curse everyone that could speak Greek. So that's sort of the setting of the story that we're going to go through. And just for a little bit of historical background, that Pompey is referenced in the story. This is the same Pompey over which Caesar triumphed in the battles of the First Triumvirate, which is portrayed in the opening scenes of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. In 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem. It was located in what was known as the Hasmonean kingdom, and there was a civil war in the kingdom between Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Pompey sided with Hyrcanus. The Roman siege of Jerusalem went on for 3 months and involved the use of siege engines and resulted in the deaths of many Jewish defenders. The Romans desecrated the Jewish Holy of Holies, but did not pillage it. This began a period of continuous Roman rule, the setting for the story and the life of Christ, which roughly dates from 30 BC to 4 AD or so, under the reign of Augustus, the eventual successor of the slain Julius Caesar. So that's the historical setting, and that we have an idea of what's actually going to be happening in the story. So hopefully with that background, we can make our way through this story that Poe wrote when he was in his early 20s. Are we ready?
Intensos. Oh, did you read the quote in the beginning?
Did I get so we have an epigram here. It says, intensos rigidam in frontem ascendere canos passus erat. I don't have that. I think it means something to the effect of, and he let hairs stand up on his rigid hairs stand up on his forehead. And then as you see, Poe sort of completes the quote, a bristly boar. So that's, maybe that will become clear what, I think, evidently there's some kind of pun with bore here, but I think we should just read on. And yes, well, yeah, but he spells it B-O-R-E, so.
Okay. Let us hurry to the walls,
said Abel Shittim to Buzi ben Levi and Simeon the Pharisee on the 10th day of the month Tammuz, in the year of the world 3941.
Let us hasten to the ramparts adjoining the gate of Benjamin, which is in the city of David, and overlooking the camp of the uncircumcised. For it is the last hour of the fourth watch, being sunrise, and the idolaters, in fulfillment of the promise of Pompey, should be awaiting us with the lambs for the sacrifices.
Simeon, Abel Shittim, and Buzi ben Levi were the Gizbarim, or sub-collectors, of the offering in the holy city of Jerusalem.
Verily,
replied the Pharisee,
let us hasten, for this generosity in the heathen is unwanted, and fickle-mindedness has ever been an attribute of the worshippers of Baal.
That they are fickle-minded and treacherous is as true as the Pentateuch,
said Buzi ben Levi.
But that is only toward the people of Adonai. When was it ever known that the Ammonites prove wanting to their own interest? Methinks it is of no great stretch of generosity to allow us lambs for the altar of the Lord, receiving in lieu thereof 30 silver shekels per head.
Thou forgettest, however, Ben Levi,
replied Abel Shittim,
that the Roman Pompey, who is now impiously besieging the city of the Most High, has no assurity that we apply not the lambs thus purchased for the altar to the sustenance of the body, rather than of the spirit.
Now by the 5 corners of my beard,
shouted the Pharisee, who belonged to the sect called the Dashers, that little knot of saints whose manner of dashing and lacerating the feet against the pavement was long a thorn and a reproach to the less zealous devotees, a stumbling block to the less gifted perambulators.
By the 5 corners of that beard, which as a priest I am forbidden to shave, have we lived to see the day when a blaspheming and idolatrous upstart of Rome shall accuse us of appropriating to the appetites of the flesh the most holy and consecrated elements? Have we lived to see the day when...
Let us not question the motives of the Philistine,
interrupted Abel Shittim.
For today we profit for the first time by his avarice or his generosity. But rather let us hurry to the ramparts, lest offering should be wanting for that altar, whose fire the rains of heaven cannot extinguish, and whose pillar of smoke no tempest can turn aside.
That part of the city to which our worthy Gizbarim now hastened, and which bore the name of its architect King David, was esteemed the most strongly fortified district of Jerusalem, being situated upon the steep and lofty hill of Zion. Here a broad, deep, circumvallatory trench, hewn from the solid rock, was defended by a wall of great strength erected upon its inner edge. This wall was adorned at regular interspaces by square towers of white marble, the lowest 60 and the highest 120 cubits in height. But in the vicinity of the gate of Benjamin, the wall arose by no means immediately from the margin of the fosse. On the contrary, between the level of the ditch and the basement of the rampart sprang up a perpendicular cliff of 250 cubits, forming part of the precipitous Mount Moriah. So that when Simeon and his associates arrived on the summit of the tower called Adonai Bezek, the loftiest of all the turrets around about Jerusalem, and the usual place of conference with the besieging army, they looked down upon the camp of the enemy from an eminence excelling by many feet that of the pyramid of Cheops, and by several that of the temple of Belus.
Verily,
Sighed the Pharisee, as he peered dizzily over the precipice.
the uncircumscribed are as the sands by the seashore, as the locusts in the wilderness. The valley of the king shall become the valley of the Adamant.
And yet,
Added Ben Levi,
thou canst not point me out a Philistine, no, not one, from Elah to Tau, from the wilderness to the battlements, who seemeth any bigger than the letter Jod.
Lower away the basket with the shekels of silver.
Here shouted a Roman soldier in a hoarse, rough voice, which seemed to issue from the regions of Pluto.
Lower away the basket with that accursed coin which it has broken the jaw of a noble Roman to pronounce. It is thus you evince your gratitude to our master Pompeius, who, in his condescension, has thought fit to listen to your idolatrous importunities? The god Phoebus, who is a true god, has been charioted for an hour, and were you not to have been on the ramparts by sunrise? Oedipal, do you think that we, the conquerors of the world, have nothing better to do than to stand waiting by the walls of every kernel to traffic with the dogs of the earth? Lower away, I say, and see that your trumpery be bright in color and just in weight.
Well, hello him.
Ejaculated the Pharisee, as the discordant tones of the centurion rattled up the crags of the precipice and fainted away against the temple.
Well, hello him. Who is the god Phoebus? Whom doth the blasphemer invoke? Thou, Buzi ben Levi, who art read in the laws of the Gentiles, and hast sojourned among them who dabble with the teraphim, is it Nergal of whom the idolater speaketh? Or Asima? Or Bizhaz? Or Tartak? Or Abramelech? Or Anomalech? Or Succoth Benoth? Or Dagon? Or Belial? Or Baal Perith? Or Baal Peror? Or Baal Zebud?
Verily, it is neither. But beware how thou lettest the rope slip too rapidly through thy fingers. For should the wicker work chance to hang on the projection of yonder crag, there will be a woeful outpouring of the holy things of the sanctuary.
By the assistance of some rudely constructed machinery, the heavily laden basket was now lowered carefully down among the multitude, and from the giddy pinnacle, the Romans were seen crowding confusedly about it. But, owing to the vast height and the prevalence of a fog, no distinct view of their operations could be obtained. A half hour had already elapsed.
We shall be too late,
sighed the Pharisee, as, at the expiration of this period, he looked over into the abyss.
We shall be too late. We shall be turned out of office by the Catholim.
No more.
Responded Abul Shittim.
No more shall we feast upon the fat of the land. No longer shall our beards be odorous with frankincense, our loins girded up with fine linen from the temple.
Raka,
swore Ben Levi.
Raka, do they mean to defraud us of the purchase money? Or, holy Moses, are they weighing the shekels of the tabernacle?
They have given the signal at last.
Roared the Pharisee.
They have given the signal at last. Pull away, Abul Shittim, and thou, Buzi ben Levi, pull away. For verily the Philistines have either still hold upon the basket, or the Lord hath softened their hearts to place therein a beast of good weight.
And the Gizbarim pulled away, while their burthen swung heavily upwards through the still increasing mist.
Bo Shahi,
As at the conclusion of an hour, some object at the extremity of the rope became indistinctly visible,
Bo Shahi,
was the exclamation which burst forth from the lips of Ben Levi.
Bo Shahi, for shame. It is a ram from the thickets of En-Gedi, and as rugged as the valley of Josaphat.
It is a firstling of the flock,
said Abel Shittim.
I know him by the bleeding of his lips and the innocent folding of his limbs. His eyes are more beautiful than the jewels of the pectoral, and his flesh is like the honey of Hebron.
It is a fatted calf from the pastures of Bashan.
Said the Pharisee.
The heathen had dealt wonderfully with us. Let us raise up our voices in a song. Let us give thanks on the shawm and on the psaltery, on the harp and the hugab, on the cistern and on the sackbut.
Oh, I see. It was not until the basket had arrived within a few feet of the Gizbarim that a low grunt betrayed to their perception a hog of no common size.
Now Elamanu.
Slowly and with upturned eyes ejaculated the trio, as, letting go their hold, the emancipated porker tumbled headlong among the Philistines.
Elamanu, God be with us. It is the unutterable flesh.
Let me no longer,
said the Pharisee, wrapping his cloak around him and departing within the city.
let me no longer be called Simeon, which signifieth he who listens, but Boanerges, the son of thunder. It's a good joke.
Oh, I forgot. At some point, I forgot to scroll.
Oh, that's fine.
Sorry about that. Well, yeah, I think instead of belabor anybody with an attempted analysis of that, I think we can all think about it on our own time. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and it was fun reading the story.
Wait, just one thing.
Yeah, kind of knew you.
Well, just one thing, one comment we got. The bristly boar is the swine that they haul up at the end. They can't eat it because it's a pig. And these people are Talmudic people of ritual. So the Romans have fulfilled the letter of the law. They have fulfilled their part of the bargain, but not the way the Jews thought. And that's actually what's about to happen to Israel at the hands of the Christian fundamentalist crusaders and the Christian Zionist types that we're seeing today. That's the unholy deal that they made. So just so people have a sense of how this story is actually applying to what's going on right now.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating because like with Ted Cruz, like he thinks he's fulfilling something almost in like a legalistic sense, right? But
right.
But yeah, it's a war. So yeah.
Right.
All right.
Well,
with that, do you want to sign us off, Kynan?
Yeah. Well, with that, thank you for tuning in. Sorry that this is a kind of a shorter program. Jose will be back next week. We'll be continuing with our Poe weekly reading. And yeah. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. If this just started right now, but on Diane Sayre's symposium, which you can find on the LaRouche organization, she's now doing a program with Richard Freeman on Operation Unthinkable, which was the British plan for a preemptive nuclear war against the Soviet Union just after the Second World War. And I would advise everyone tune into that. So thank you. We'll see you next week.